Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are putting on our project manager hats and diving deep into the rule book that governs the world's largest construction and design build projects.
And we mean deep.
We're not talking theory here. We are dissecting the operational timelines, the financial triggers, and all the accountability measures inside the FIDC 2017 conditions of contract. Specifically, how these huge projects start, stop, and handle delays. We're talking clauses 8 and 9.
That's right.
Our mission today is really to give you a shortcut past all that dense legal language. We want to extract the concrete, very specific deadlines that define momentum, that define setback management, and turn these abstract contract terms into a clear governance roadmap.
And you have to remember, these clauses are really the pulse of a project. They take all the strategic planning and turn it into a legally binding timeline.
So it's where the rubber meets the road.
It is. The whole system is built on two pillars: speed and documentation. The rules say that everything from, that initial mobilization to the moment work might be suspended, it all has to follow a structured path where the clock is always running and every single action must be recorded.
Okay, let's unpack this starting line then. When a major contract is signed, how quickly does the contractor actually have to get things moving? It feels like the biggest project should take forever to mobilize.
You'd think so, but the contract demands a surprisingly rapid pace. It's designed to prevent any kind of contract stagnation.
Okay.
So the first trigger is the engineer issuing a notice stating the commencement date. And they have to do this at least 14 days before that specified start date.
Just 14 days. That's a pretty short heads up.
It is, but the real constraint is the date itself. That commencement date must fall within 42 days after the contractor receives the letter of acceptance.
So 6 weeks. You get the letter, the euphoria fades, and you realize you have 6 weeks to get all your ducks in a row for that notice to even be issued.
Exactly. It can be an aggressive timeline, especially for, say, a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure project.
Does that timeline ever get, weaponized if the employer isn't fully ready to go?
It certainly creates pressure on the employer side. If the employer or their engineer drags their feet, they are just eating into their own schedule. Some clause 8.1 then puts the obligation firmly on the contractor.
And what does it say?
It says they must commence on or as soon as is reasonably practicable after the specified date, and this is the key phrase, proceed with due expedition and without delay.
Due expedition. That sounds like legal jargon. What does it actually translate to in practice?
It means moving forward with a continuous, defensible effort. It's the legal term for avoiding any purposeful slowdowns or just letting the project sit idle because you're maybe juggling resources on another job.
So it sets the tone. Once you start, you have to maintain a steady rate of progress.
A steady, continuous rate of progress right until you hit the end point. And that finish line is also crystal clear. Completion has to be achieved within the time for completion, which is in 8.2.
And that includes all the work needed before the taking over of the works, which is basically when the employer can start using the facility.
That's a whole other clause, but yes, that's the goal.
But before anyone can start building anything, they need the instruction manual, the program. This isn't just a basic timeline, is it? It's the operational roadmap for the entire contract.
It is, and they get a very short window to produce it. The initial program has to be submitted to the engineer within 28 days after receiving that commencement notice.
28 days. Wow. And I assume the detail required is massive. It can't just be a simple
Gantt chart. Not at all. It's an incredibly detailed technical document. The program must legally include things like the specific dates the contractor needs the employer to grant access to different parts of the site.
So it forces the employer to plan ahead too?
Absolutely. It also needs the entire anticipated timing for every single stage design, procurement, delivery, construction, testing. It even has to factor in time for the engineer's own review periods on designs. And crucially, all activities must be logically linked.
What does logically linked mean here?
It means showing the earliest and latest start and finish dates, the float, and most importantly, the critical paths.
Ah, the critical path. Why is identifying that so vital right at the beginning?
Because the critical path determines the minimum possible duration of the project. If any activity on that path gets delayed, the entire project gets delayed. Simple as that.
So by forcing the contractor to identify it up front, the engineer knows exactly which activities are the most sensitive.
They know where the potential bottlenecks are. It's the highest risk data point in the entire plan.
Okay, so this hugely detailed document lands on the engineer's desk. They can't just sit on it, right? How long do they have to review and approve it?
No, they can't. And this is a built-in safety valve to keep the project moving. The engineer has 21 days to review the initial program.
3 weeks.
3 weeks. And if they fail to act within that window, if they don't issue any notice of noncompliance, the program is deemed to have received a notice of no objection.
That's fascinating. So their inaction automatically makes the document legally binding.
Precisely. It shifts a huge chunk of accountability back to the employer's team. If they object, they have to do so clearly, detailing exactly why it doesn't comply.
And what if the contractor has to revise it later?
If a revised program is submitted, maybe because progress has fallen behind, the engineer's review window shrinks even tighter, down to just 14 days.
It really shows the contract's bias toward moving forward, doesn't it?
It's all about momentum.
Now, with all this intricate planning, the contract must have a system to make sure people don't just bury bad news. What's this advanced warning system in 8.4?
This is one of the most proactive requirements in the entire contract. All three parties, the contractor, the employer, and the engineer, are obligated to advise the others in advance of any known or probable future events that might cause trouble.
Trouble like what?
Anything that could, say, delay the execution, increase the contract price, or adversely affect the completed performance of the works.
So it's not just a nice to have, it's a contractual obligation to be honest about future risks.
Yes. And the engineer, using this warning, can then request the contractor to submit a formal proposal, a plan of action, to specifically avoid or minimize those predicted effects. It moves governance from reactive dispute management to proactive risk mitigation.
Okay, so we have the program, we have the advance warnings, but delays, they're inevitable. Let's talk about the two biggest letters in construction. EOT, extension of time. What makes a delay excusable?
The grounds are very specific under subclause 8.5. If the scope of work changes because of a variation, for example, EOT is granted for that cause. That's pretty straightforward.
Makes sense. What else?
The next clear ground is any delay or impediment caused directly by the employer, their personnel, or any of their other contractors on the site.
Right, the employer pays for their own actions. But what about things outside of anyone's direct control? Like acts of nature or, global events?
This is where the term unforeseeable becomes the ultimate hurdle you have to clear. EOT can be granted for exceptionally adverse climatic conditions.
But the standard for that must be incredibly high.
Incredibly high. It has to be weather that is so adverse, it's considered unforeseeable when you look at the published historical climate data for that specific region. A common summer storm won't cut it. A record-breaking 1-in-50-year monsoon might.
So the contract forces you to prove you couldn't have reasonably anticipated it based on the public record?
That's it, exactly. And it also addresses modern crises. EOT is specifically granted for unforeseeable shortages of personnel or goods caused by an epidemic or governmental actions.
Ah, so things like unexpected border closures, global supply chain shutdowns. The contract recognizes those.
It does. It has to.
But that seems like it could be a loophole. Isn't it easy for a contractor to just blame local authorities for their own poor planning, especially with something like a permit?
Well, that's why the contract sets a very high bar, which is covered under 8.6. Delays caused by authorities are covered, but only if the contractor can diligently prove they followed all the correct procedures, submitted their applications on time, and acted reasonably, and the delay was still deemed unforeseeable.
So the burden is always on the party asking for the EOT.
Always. You have to prove you were diligent.
Let's get into the most complex scenario, concurrent delays. What happens when you have a delay caused by the employer and one caused by the contractor happening at the same time? How do you untangle that mess?
This is where the contract gets intentionally nuanced. It says if an employer-caused delay is concurrent with contractor-caused delay, the EOT assessment follows the specific rules laid out in the special provisions of that particular contract.
And if those are silent?
Then the engineer has to assess the EOT appropriately. It leaves room for professional judgment based on the specifics.
Can you give us a quick hypothetical?
Sure. Imagine the employer delays access to Sector 3 of the site by 6 weeks. At the same time, the contractor's own procurement team misses the delivery date for the specialized steel needed for that same sector by 4 weeks.
Okay, so both are happening at once.
Right. Both delays are running concurrently. The engineer has to analyze which event was truly on the critical path, and in many jurisdictions, only the employer's delay will grant an EOT, but maybe only for the non-concurrent period. The key point, though, is that the engineer can increase a previous EOT determination, but they can never decrease the total EOT they've already granted.
That's critical. So they can correct an EOT upwards
Mhm.
if new information comes to light, but they can't take it back once it's been granted.
Exactly. It's a built-in protection for the contractor.
So that covers EOT. Let's flip it and look at the delays that are strictly the contractor's fault. That's under Subclause 8.7, rate of progress. What happens when the contractor is just too slow?
If the actual progress is too slow, or it falls behind the agreed program for a reason that is not an EOT cause, the engineer can instruct the contractor to submit a revised program detailing accelerated methods.
And this is where the risk shifts entirely. Tell us about the financial implication here.
The contractor has to adopt these revised, accelerated methods, increasing working hours, personnel, equipment, and they must do so at the contractor's risk and cost.
No room for negotiation.
None. And if that acceleration then causes the employer to incur additional costs, maybe paying their own staff overtime for extra inspections, the employer is entitled to claim those costs back from the contractor.
So the contractor is paying for their own inefficiency. And if they still fail to meet the final deadline, the ultimate penalty kicks in.
Yeah.
Delay damages.
That's right, under 8.8. These are paid daily at the rate stated in the contract data from the date the time for completion expired until the works are actually completed.
Is the contractor's liability unlimited when it comes to these damages? Can they just spiral forever?
No, thankfully. The contract sets a clear limit, a cap. The total amount of delay damages cannot exceed the maximum amount stated in the contract data. And the contract also states these damages are the only damages due from the contractor for that specific failure.
Are there any exceptions to that cap?
Only in very extreme circumstances. If the contract is terminated or if there's proof of fraud, gross negligence, deliberate default, things like that, then the liability limits are usually waived. But for simple delay, the cap is fixed.
Okay, let's shift gears. Sometimes a project needs to hit the pause button for reasons outside of anyone's fault, or maybe due to the employer's needs. Let's talk about suspension of works under Clause 8.9.
The engineer, acting for the employer, can instruct the suspension of part or even all of the works. They have to note the date and the specific cause.
And what's the contractor's first duty?
Their duty during that suspension is immediate and critical. They have to secure, protect, and properly store the suspended works against any deterioration, loss, or damage. It's a non-negotiable obligation.
And the compensation for that suspension all hinges on who was at fault. Right.
Absolutely. If the cause of the suspension is the contractor's fault, they get nothing. No EOT, no extra money. But if the suspension is not their fault, say a government regulatory halt, then the contractor is entitled to an EOT and payment of cost plus profit.
Let's define cost plus profit clearly, because that's a key financial term.
It means the contractor is reimbursed for all their documented costs incurred during that suspension period, things like demobilization, protection, site overhead, plus the contractually agreed margin or profit rate on top of those costs. It protects their bottom line.
Right, so they don't lose money on something that wasn't their fault.
That's the idea. And there's also a very specific rule in 8.11.1 that protects their cash flow.
About materials not yet on site.
That's the one.
Yeah.
If a suspension lasts for more than 28 days, the contractor can receive payment for plant and materials that are not yet delivered to the site.
That's a huge protection.
It is, but there are conditions. The items had to be scheduled for delivery during that period. They have to comply with the contract, and the contractor has to mark them clearly as the employer's property.
What happens when that pause button turns into a full-blown crisis? If a project has been suspended for too long, what's the exit ramp?
Well, if the suspension continues for more than 84 days, that's about 3 months, the contractor then gains the right to initiate action. They can issue a notice to the engineer requesting permission to proceed.
And if the engineer just ignores that notice?
If the engineer fails to issue a resumption notice within the next 28 days, the contractor gets some serious options. They can basically force a resolution.
What are the options?
They can either agree to an even longer suspension and negotiate a bigger package of EOT and cost plus profit, or they can start scaling back the project's scope.
Scaling back or even terminating.
Correct. If only part of the works are affected, the contractor can treat that suspended part as an omission, which is basically a variation instruction reducing the scope. But if the whole of the works are suspended for that long, the contractor has the ultimate right to issue a notice of termination under Clause 16.2.
Wow. Okay, and finally, when that resumption notice eventually comes, what happens then?
The contract mandates a joint operation. When work is instructed to resume, the contractor and the engineer must jointly examine all the affected works. The engineer records any deterioration or loss that happened during the suspension.
And the contractor has to fix it.
The contractor must then promptly make good all of that damage to ensure the final project still complies with the contract specifications. And the cost for fixing that, of course, depends on who caused the suspension in the first place.
So what does this all mean for someone managing one of these massive projects? This deep dive really shows that control isn't maintained by abstract goodwill. It's a highly specific, rigorous framework of deadlines and documentation.
And risk clearly shifts based on causality.
Right.
If it's the contractor's fault, they bear the financial burden and risk. If it's the employer's fault or an excusable external event, then it triggers EOT and cost plus profit.
Right.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see the whole system is designed to incentivize diligence and transparent communication. Just look at that mandatory advance warning system.
That's a great point.
But the very strict rules around unforeseeable events, the exceptional weather, the epidemics, they show that even the most detailed contracts have to explicitly account for these unpredictable forces that are entirely outside of human control. And they have to set up clear financial mechanisms for dealing with them.
It certainly clarifies the difference between a simple, poor planning decision and what the contract defines as a catastrophe. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into project governance.
My pleasure.
Now, as you consider all these rules, mull over this final provocative thought. In this highly structured system, which party ultimately bears the greater burden of continuous documentation? The party seeking an extension of time to excuse their delay, or the party seeking to enforce delay damages against the contractor? Something to explore until our next deep dive.